Welcome to the Emotional Balance Sheet, the go-to podcast for parents with multiple kids, especially those with twins, triplets, or more, who are navigating the maze of modern family life and personal finance. Whether you're overwhelmed by education or retirement planning, parenting dilemmas, career transitions, or trying to define your purpose and plan, we're here to guide you with empathy, encouragement, and expertise. Hosted by Paul Fenner, founder of Tama Capital, a certified financial planner and parent to 4 kids, including a set of triplets. Our podcast is your ally in the quest for financial peace of mind, proving that money matters, but family comes first. Subscribe now and join our community of empowered parents at tamacapital.com. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon for investment decisions. Clients of Tama may retain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
What does comprehensive financial planning even mean? At Tama Capital, it means a family office where lifestyle planning such as retirement, college, portfolio management, and tax prep and planning are all under one umbrella. But it goes beyond numbers. We focus as much on the emotional side of financial planning as we do on the financial side. We get you. We understand your challenges of building a family, business or career, and a healthy life. We are devoted to wealth planning for families like yours because we are you. Learn how our family can help your family by visiting tamacapital.com. That's something that I wrestle with on a daily basis. It's like showing up at the Masters every year. It's like, why do I want to win this golf tournament so badly? Why do I want to win the Open Championship so badly? I don't know. Because if I win, it's going to be awesome for 2 minutes. That is a quote from world's top golfer, Scottie Scheffler, before he tees it up to try to win another major golf tournament. Scottie's point is also the topic of conversation today with our resident psychologist expert, Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. Dr. Jen and I explore how the thrill of big wins fades quickly and why major milestones, whether in sports, career, or personal life, rarely satisfy us for long. Together, we also unpack common traps around goal setting, retirement, and the pursuit of enough, all while exploring the importance of focusing on values over simple achievements. There are many great personal stories that Dr. Jen and I share in this discussion, so I hope you could take away a few strategies from our talk to help you along your journey in life. Please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Jennifer Dragonette. All right, Dr. Jen, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm doing great today, Paul. How are you?
Well, you should be doing good. And I should have asked you this because now I'm going to put you on the spot for our listeners and viewers. Today is Dr. Jen's birthday.
That's right.
Yay!
What a great way to spend a birthday.
That's right. I feel really fortunate that you're spending it with us, getting up early in California with us. So happy birthday. And
Thank you.
And it's great to see you. I was going through a draw because we hadn't seen each other probably like 5, maybe 6 weeks, and usually we're 4 weeks every like clockwork. So glad to have you back and glad to see you. So
great to be back.
Today we're gonna start with a little golf. I'm not sure if any of our listeners and viewers like golf, but there was this quote by Scottie Scheffler, who, to educate our non-golfers, is the number 1 ranked golf player in the world. And he's a phenomenal guy, very grounded. Obviously, I don't know him personally, but from what I read and follow him, he's an amazing guy. And the last major of the year, so in golf there's 4 majors. The last major of the year is this weekend over in Ireland, the British Open. And so he had this quote when they were asking him about kind of like winning. And he says, "That's something that I wrestle with on a daily basis," Scheffler said, where the Open Championship begins this Thursday. It's like showing up to the Masters every year. It's like, why do I want to win this golf tournament so badly? Why do I want to win the Open Championship so badly? I don't know, because if I win, it's going to be awesome for 2 minutes. And that really, really resonated with me. And I think maybe it ties into, I just recorded my 200th episode, can't believe that, of the Emotional Balance Sheet podcast a few weeks ago. And I was kind of pulling on that same thread about these big moments in life, like winning a major golf tournament, or any golf tournament for that matter. Like, that high is with you for, in Scottie's case, like a couple minutes, and then it's gone, and you're like moving on to the next. And so I thought that this is a really interesting conversation or topic for the two of us to talk about, to get your thoughts on that, and kind of where this leads us in life. Because another angle that I come at from a financial planning perspective, and I think we brought it up at least conversationally between the two of us. I know I've talked to family at nauseum about this topic, is retirement, and this, planning all these years to get to retirement, and then you get there, and then you're sadly mistaken because it was not what you thought it was.
Absolutely. There's so much in there. And I think, we can apply that to sport. We can apply it to finances, life in general. So often we're working toward a goal, and goals are important, and goals often keep us motivated, but goals don't satisfy us. And really, thinking about what he was saying in that quote, it'll be satisfying for 2 minutes, right? If we're lucky, it'll be satisfying for 2 minutes. And so much of our life is like that. Once I get that promotion, I'll be satisfied. I'll be good enough. Once I retire, once I get married, once I hit this birthday milestone, right? We often set these arbitrary goalposts, and there are pros and cons to that. If we're moving towards something and that's keeping us on track, if it's keeping us excited, if it's keeping us, vibrant and thriving, fantastic. But what we often notice, just like Scottie there, is that we get to that goal and it's not what we expected, right? It's not, quote, enough, or it's not the thing that's going to make us then happy for the rest of our lives. We get this immediate, what's next, right? Okay, great, good job. Let's get another goal online. And many people, I've talked with a lot of athletes about this as well, actually experience a period of depression, or, kind of a lull after attaining a goal, after getting that promotion, after having that milestone birthday, because it didn't satisfy us forever. It got us that joy. It got us the accolades or the acclaim or the article in the paper or whatever it was that we thought was going to be the excitement. And then that's it. And then we all move on to the next thing. So it makes me think of a few things. One, it makes me think of our conversation about values, and how the difference between values and goals. Values are things that we're constantly able to move toward, that might include these amazing milestones along the way. But goals are binary, right? We've achieved it or not. And when we achieve that goal, it kind of has already happened in the past. So we can't really orient ourselves around the attainment of a goal, because we end up in this kind of if-then scenario, right? If I get this, then I will be okay. And there are a couple of problems with that. One is the one that we just talked about, where it doesn't really change the way we feel. But the other is that often we're delaying some part of our life until we get that goal. I can't go out and socialize with anybody until I, run that marathon. Right? Okay, great. You're training. Maybe you need to postpone some of these things. But if we're constantly postponing our life because we want to get to that, that pinnacle of something, we're actually missing out on a lot of things, and we're not getting the joy or the thriving or the vitality that we were hoping those goals would give us.
I think in listening to you play that back, the silver bullet big question for me then is, and I've always struggled with this, and I'm struggling with this with my daughter, Madison, who's my competitive swimmer, is how do you enjoy the journey? Like how, and I don't know if we're going to solve that one today, but that's really the question in the back of my mind, because in listening to you talk about that as well, it made me think of Madison number one. And then it made me think back to that conversation we had about Dan Sullivan and the gap and the gain, that book that we talked about, that really changed my perspective on my life probably 3-4 years ago now. And to what you were talking about is how you measure. Because if you're always if you're just measuring it on those goals and achieving those goals, you're going to be sadly disappointed versus having that purpose or that value that you called it as your horizon.
We're kind of talking about the difference between fixed mindset and growth mindset. When we have a fixed mindset, we've attained a goal or not, right? It's often we're competitive, maybe with ourselves or maybe with others. Have I won or not? Right? Did I get the Masters or did I not? Did I win that swim meet or did I not? And a few challenges with the fixed mindset are we often also think that we have all of the skills that we're going to have, right? We are as good as we're going to be. And, am I good enough to get this goal? And it can be exciting to get that goal. But as we're talking about, it doesn't leave us a whole lot of room versus a growth mindset, which is much more about the process. And maybe it's not as sexy, right? It's like, okay, I'm growing every day. And yet it feels more rewarding because we recognize that there is always room for more, right? I'm not competing with anybody except who I was yesterday. Right? And doesn't mean that I have to be better on paper, but am I learning something? So for me, when I'm working with athletes or, working within myself or my family, I'm trying to think of what am I learning? How am I growing in this way? If going for the next big goal is a way that I can continue to grow, fantastic. Maybe I set that goal, but not because that award or that, diploma or that whatever it is going to make me feel better about myself, but because it's going to help me learn something in the process. So if we can be in more of that growth mindset, without a specific goal or without a prize that we have to win, fantastic. If that goal can motivate us, or if we can say, all right, my 50th birthday is coming up and I would like to be at this fitness level, or I'd like to be at this, level with my friends, that's fine. But I want to be thinking of it as, okay, I'm moving towards something. I'm in this growth process. I'm trying to learn more about myself. I'm trying to learn more about this world that I'm in. Maybe I'm noticing that my values are shifting. It's a very broad approach rather than honing in on this one specific goal, which is probably going to not do a whole lot except attain that goal.
I hope when I turn 50 next year, I'm at the British Open next year. I don't know where it's at, but I know I'm going to be in Ireland somewhere for my 50th. And the one thing that caught my ear with what you just said was that the non-sexy part of that. And I think about James Clear and this concept of 1% better. And it's almost like you don't notice that 1%. Like every day you just keep working and doing and doing and doing. And then it's like the power of compounding that we talked about before, that I talk to families about all the time, is that you just don't get in the way of compounding. You just let it work. And then, one day you've got the money in the bank to be able to retire or to put your kids through college or whatever that may be. But if you just think of it like, oh my God, I have to save $1 million, it's like completely overwhelming. Mm-hmm. But if I need to save, I'll just call it like $5,000 every year over a 30-year period, and that gets me that hypothetical number, whatever I need, it becomes less daunting. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering if like how, going back to the question I'm kind of wrestling with is like, what's the silver bullet to be able to enjoy the journey? Is there some kind of linkage or tie into that thought?
Yeah, there is. And let's just take that example of if I said, okay, you've got to save $1 million next year. Even if you could, would that be satisfying? Right? Probably not, because what we do as humans is we say, okay, great, I could save $1 million. I should probably save $2 million though, right? Because now my lifestyle has changed. Now I'm buying more expensive things, or now I'm realizing $1 million really isn't enough. So we save another $1 million. But is that really enough? Right? And I know you and I often talk offline after we record about this concept of enough. We're often thinking in terms of money or retirement, but we could just as easily apply it to accolades or awards or, that feeling of satisfaction when we win something. Is it really enough? Right? Does that give us something that we can hold on to and say, great, I have gotten enough? And that's why I come back to that concept of values, because if we're really thinking of values as a direction rather than a goal, if our value was to move west, when have we moved west enough? There's always more west, right? There's always more learning, or, whatever our value set is. If our value is connection, we can always connect more, right? At what point have we connected enough, or at what point have we been authentic enough? So for me, and, those of you who've been listening, this is probably not a surprise. A lot of it comes back to, for me, what is this really about? What is it that we're hoping to get from that $1 million in the bank? Or what is it that we're hoping to get from the Masters win that we just worked so hard for? What does it mean to us? Just like when we talk about money and hard conversations between couples, and we often come back to, well, what does money really stand for? What does it symbolize or signify to you? I think we can do the same thing with these big goals in life. That promotion that you've been working so hard for, what does it really mean to you? Is it because it puts more money in the bank and now your kids can go to college? Is it because it makes you proud of yourself? Is it because you have something to say when someone at your 25th college reunion says, what do you do for a living, right? It means really different things. And often we find that when we're doing something for an external reason, like I want to, quote unquote, impress somebody, or I want to have the right answer to that question of what do I do, or I want my alumni magazine to, have a special about me. Who's that for? And is that really my intrinsic value system, or am I hoping that that will fill a void that hasn't been filled before, or make people see me in a way that maybe they haven't seen before? Typically, those values don't last very long. It's not a real value to say, my core value is impressing others, right? Or my core value is being on the front page of the paper. Like, that's not actually very satisfying. And so what we often see, and I'm sure we can call up many, many examples from, politics and public figures, I don't even need to name names, is, people who seem like they have plenty of money are just getting more and more and more and more, right? Or power, and I need more and more and more. But these aren't happy people, right? These aren't necessarily people who are seeming fulfilled, because there's never enough when it's not really about you and your values.
In listening to you say that, I go back to Scottie Scheffler's comments and article, and I also think of Warren Buffett as well, the great investor, where I know Scottie in this interview talked about how you really have to, and going back to my question, like, enjoy the journey. And I know he noted in that article about how much he really loves to practice. He just loves the game. And I think about Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett just loves to read. He could sit in his office all day, every day, and just read. And I think when it comes to, and I don't know where I'm going with this. I feel like I'm in all different directions today, Dr. Jen, so I apologize. But if I kind of play that with people I work with day in and day out, and people that you work in day in and day out, is that you're not always going to love your job or your career or, whatever it may be. But I think there's certain aspects that there's got to be something deeper under the surface that really does pull you in, or you could, be facing a very miserable career. And because I think about those two examples, and I think about the example of just going back to Madison and being in the pool. I mean, and Scottie on a golf course. Those can be very lonely places. I was never a swimmer, but I was a golfer. And you can get in your head a lot. And so you have to really, I think, enjoy what you do, knowing that you're not going to enjoy it all the time. But if you're really struggling with it, then somehow you got to figure out what the right change is.
Yes, exactly. We get fused to these ideals of who we are or what we signify in the world. And, fusion isn't always a bad thing, but it does make us believe things about ourselves. So, if I'm a pro golfer and I'm having a tough season, what does that mean about who I am at my core, right? If my job is dependent on, proving this level of expertise or attaining these awards, I often get fused to, well, then I must win. I must be successful, right? I'm nothing if I don't. And we can get these if then clauses that really fuse into our brain. We don't even necessarily realize that they're there until we don't achieve. Right. So it's all fine and good if we're winning things and we're feeling good about ourselves. And like, yes, I'm an athlete. I knew it because I keep winning. So I must really be an athlete. That must be who I am. And then, oh no, we get an injury, right? Or we get the flu or something happens or we cannot make it to a certain thing or we need to change jobs for some reason. And we can't be that identity that has become so important to us. And, at the end of the day, sometimes life forces us to recognize that we can't really be fused to some of these things. We're talking a lot about sports, and I think that makes sense, right? Because these are often these things where it is a very clear winner, right? There's someone who's the
Right.
best at this thing. And I work with a lot of athletes in my field, and oftentimes that's really the pain point where maybe there's been a significant injury and who am I now, right? Or what happens if I've, aged out of my field and I used to be the best and now I'm, watching these people half my age come up in this sport. What does that mean about who I am? Right. We don't get to take those awards with us and parade them around at age 70. Like, but 50 years ago, I was really good at this thing. Right. We all kind of know what that feels like. So I think really what it becomes about, I'm all for going for those big goals. It's wonderful, right? It keeps us motivated. It's really exciting. It just is also important to recognize that we have a lot to be proud of outside of those bigger things. And so in my work with my clients, whether they're athletes or business folks or family people, it really doesn't matter, humans, I'm often working with them to do what I call pride practice. And I can't remember if we've talked about this on here or not, but
No, but this sounds good.
it's one of my favorite forms of journaling or just, mild practice that people can do at home for exactly this reason, because oftentimes we get in such a binary headspace, right? I used to be an executive and now I'm not. So I'm not succeeding anymore, right? Or I used to be the best at my sport and now I can't even do my sport, or now I'm kind of middle of the road. So I'm terrible, right? It's this either or. And so I often recommend, and this is really the only kind of journaling that I do, that at the end of the day, you just sit down and take 2 minutes and write down 3 things that you're proud of yourself for that day, big or small. And it's not things that you're proud of your family for. It's not things that, I'm proud of my company for. It's what did I personally do? How did I show up today that made me feel proud of myself? And maybe the first couple of days are really obvious. They're kind of the big categories that we think of ourselves. I was a good mom today. I was a good therapist today. That's how my pride practice kind of started. And then my challenge is try not to repeat the same things, right? So then we start looking for those other things. And it starts to be things like, I smiled at a stranger today and they smiled back. And I think I really impacted them in that moment. Or, I reached out to a friend of mine who I hadn't talked to in a while and heard back, and they said they were having a tough day and it meant a lot to them. Right. So sometimes it really hones in on, what do I do that makes me feel like me? Really getting back to those ideas of values. The things that other people might be proud of themselves for are, I didn't feel like leaving the house today, but I did, and I took myself on a walk. And I was proud of myself for that. Or, I kept my money invested even though there was a scary downturn because my financial advisor told me to, and I trusted, and I was proud of being able to trust. Right. So we have to start looking a little bit deeper for those moments of pride. And when I look back over years and years of my own pride practice, very little of it is those big ticket items, right? Every once in a while I get to write, I'm proud of being a regular guest on a podcast, right? Like something big, or I'm proud of moving out of a big job and starting a private practice. But those are pretty rare events. We're not typically making these big shifts. We're not typically winning something huge every day. But we are, if we're paying attention, doing a whole lot that we can be proud of. And that's how we start to really fill in our sense of self. So I now walk around feeling pretty proud of myself. I'm a human, so I have moments, but in general, I'm like, yeah, I like who I am as a person. If some big accolade happens, that's amazing. But I know that the people who are important to me aren't going to love me anymore because of that. I know that no one's going to love me less if that doesn't happen. It's just a nice extra thing. And so I think, coming to Scottie's quote, wouldn't that be amazing if we can be going for these big things because it's fun, it's exciting, we learn a lot, but it doesn't impact who we are and how we think of ourselves, whether that thing happens or not.
That was really moving. That was really moving. I'm not even sure where I go with that next. I think one of the things I was thinking about when you were explaining that, and kind of going back to a few things that we've already hit on, I think you just mentioned it too, is how do we, because it's the little things every day that we don't notice that goes back to that whole power of compounding that builds up over time. And then we have that great, or big moment. But I think going back to this thought I just keep having is with enjoying the journey is how to make goals or objectives basically beneficial rather than harmful. I didn't phrase that probably the right way I wanted to, but hopefully you know what I mean by now.
Yeah, I think I do. And it is
instructive versus destructive. That's it. How do you make goals or objectives instructive versus destructive? Because like, as we've kind of talked about around this theme with Scottie and what you've just talked about with pride, is that you want to have something to look forward to, but you don't want it to be so destructive as well. And I think that's top of my mind too, because when I think of this situation with Madison, that's one of the things I think about is like, and I've talked to some of our coaches about this before. It's like, we're afraid that like, she's gonna burn herself out. Like, how can you find the joy in what you do if you're not always like in swim, for example, like cutting time?
Well, it is a great question. And it's something I think a lot about, particularly with kids and teens in sports, because it's so competitive and it feels so good to win, right? It feels so good to get personal bests and cut time off. And one of my kids is a runner. And so we're watching the track scores, right? And it really is exciting when those times go down and it's such tangible progress. And then what if some really fast kid joins the team and all of a sudden they're not the fastest kid anymore? And it's not because you are less good as a person than you were, but it sure can feel like that. And I think it's one of the reasons why having these numerical goals or these kind of ranking goals can be kind of destructive. A lot of it's out of our control. We can compete against ourselves, but we can't control what other people do. And if we're comparing ourselves to others, it's almost always a losing battle, unless we are truly the best in the world at something. But guess what? We can keep moving that bar too, because I work with some of those athletes and they're still not satisfied with their performance. So, it's just human nature. I think a couple things. One, breaking down our goals into smaller goals, just like you were saying, $5,000 a year rather than $1 million at a time. That allows us to really feel that, completionist satisfaction, that checking the box. I get that. I love that, to check a box. I did this thing. I got this objective or this sub goal. So I think if we can break our goals down to smaller goals, then great. We can give ourselves credit for attaining those things. And I certainly want us to do that. I think that's very important. And then I think it's also kind of what we were talking about a minute ago of why is this goal important? What would this mean to you if you can attain this goal? And really holding on to the meaning of it rather than the goal itself. We've talked about the fact that I'm a rock climber here, and this is something I talk about with my rock climber clients about a lot, because we have grades. So, maybe you're climbing a 512 grade outside, which is hard for me. Well, that's great. But then you get the 512 and guess what? There's a 513, right? And there's a 513.
It never ends.
And C and D, right? And then there's 514. And we really cannot base our sense of self on the grade we climb, the speed that we swim, the speed that we run, because a lot of that is just, it's a moving goalpost. So I like to break it down into, both that pride practice that we talked about, and also, what did I learn? What did I learn today, right? For Madison, what did I learn in this meet? What did I learn about my skills, my strengths, my challenges? What did I learn about areas that I can continue growing? And can I look at the growth as the point, rather than the attainment of something? So that's what I mean about the pride practice. Sometimes, the things that I'm writing down are, I'm proud of myself for figuring out that one weird little hold on that one climb that I didn't think I could do. Right. And I held it for 1 second longer than I thought I could before I let go. Right. Just these micro movements, because they compound over time. And if we're not giving ourselves credit for those micro goals, for those micro learnings, it's kind of like we're not allowing it to compound, right? So we're waiting for those big events, and we're kind of missing all of the evidence along the way that in fact we are approaching it every day. Sometimes it becomes so binary that we miss it completely.
So if there's one, I think, actionable thing that people can take away, and I'm gonna try to use this with Madison starting tonight, is this concept of pride, and at the end of the day, jotting down 2 or 3 things that you felt really good about. Did I get that right?
Right. Some things that you're proud of yourself for. That's usually how I phrase it.
Proud of yourself for.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, big or small. And if we really want to challenge ourselves, try not to repeat them. Right. So it's kind of like we get the big ones out of the way in the first few days, things that are really obvious that other people might be able to name for us. And then we have to look a little deeper. What are a couple of things today that I can be proud of myself for? It doesn't have to be things that people could see. It could be, thoughts I had. It could be I was gentle with myself. It could be I let myself rest today because I knew I needed the rest. It could be, I got myself to that meeting even though I was scared. Usually for me, it's things like that where I did this even though it was scary, right? Or I was brave even though I wasn't sure it would work out. I was willing to fail, right? So we can start to kind of prime the pump for what we're proud of. And you mentioned something a minute ago that I think tracks with this. When we start doing this practice, any practice, right? Gratitude practice, pride practice, any of these journaling prompts, once we do this for a few days at a time, the cool thing is we get the experience of writing it. We also get all day the next day, our brain is starting to look for those things, right? Because our brain is saying, okay, at 10 o'clock tonight, Jen's going to sit down and be looking for 3 things. So I'm going to start noticing those things. So we actually start compounding during the day too, because we get this kind of script running in the background, like, oh, there's something I'm proud of myself, or there's something. And just like we are familiar with the term triggers, right? We have like trauma triggers that trigger our nervous system. We can look for the inverse. I think of these as glimmers, right? Where we can look for moments where I do feel connected, where I do feel proud or safe. We are primed as humans to look for the negative, to look for the moments when we're disappointed in ourselves, or we didn't show up, or we failed, because, historically and genetically that keeps us safe to remember the danger. So we have to deliberately shift our focus over to what's not dangerous, what's not threatening, what does make us feel proud. It's a muscle that we can grow and tone, just like our nervous system is always toning the part that's looking for threat. So we're really just trying to balance out and right size, all the wonderful things we are doing, all the ways we are succeeding and showing up, to give ourselves credit for that. It's not Pollyanna or creating something where there isn't anything real. It's just kind of capturing and noticing all the things that we deserve to be proud of that may not be the gold medal.
Well, I can't say it enough. I so enjoy these conversations. I know our listeners do as well. We covered a lot of different and unique topics, and some old ones too. I think as you and I build this relationship with each other and with the audience, there's certain things that we can always come back to that I think are foundation or fundamental to what you do as a therapist and what I do as an advisor, and molding those 2 worlds together as we help people on their life journey. So, Dr. Jen, I hope that you have a great rest of the day and a happy birthday. And always great to see you. And thanks for coming back on. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much, Paul.
Enjoy the journey, not just the destination. How many times have you heard that? It sounds so cliche, but cliches are there for a reason, I think, because they're so true. But how do you actually do that? And that's that question I kept coming back to with Dr. Jen is, how do you do that? How do you really enjoy the journey? And I think now that I'm talking this back through and thinking to myself about this, and it came up in our conversation today, and it's come up in our conversations before, is this idea from Dan Sullivan called the gap and the gain. And the only way that we can really move forward is actually by looking back. Because if you're just staring out at the horizon, it's not changing. So you could keep going forward, but the picture doesn't change. So how do you feel like you've made progress? Well, you have to turn around and look back. And I think that's one of the biggest points I think I want to highlight from our conversation with Dr. Jen today. The other thing I find that has been, I think, literally like life-changing for me, and I brought this up on the show many times, is that this daily practice I started doing a few years ago, when I start my day, again, sounds cheesy, sounds cliche, but I swear it works. You'd have to talk to my wife, Teresa, to see about the positive results I've had, maybe, or lack thereof, or with my kids. But writing down 3 things that you're grateful for. And it really helps start your day in a positive way. And this is really important. Like when school's going on and I've got triplets plus 1 fighting and yelling at each other, scrambling to get out the door for school. Those are tense moments. And sometimes it can take me a whole hour to take myself back down, to breathe. But when I go in my office and I start to write down and think about those 3 things, it really helps shift me into a mindset where I can be productive and get my mind righted again on what I want to do for the day. And Jen has this idea that she calls pride practice, where it's kind of what I do in reverse. So at the end of every day, she recommends this simple exercise of jotting down 2 to 3 things that you're most proud of. And I think she really emphasized that it doesn't matter if it's big or small. And I found that with my, 3 things I'm thankful or gratitude for every day, is that sometimes these are like really small. Like today I wrote down, it's when I'm recording this, it's the, middle of the summer, but it was a really cool morning, like temperature wise here in Michigan. And you don't get those days very often in the middle of the summer. And it was just great to be outdoors, rucking around the subdivision that I live in. And it was great. So it's something like really small like that. So I hope that you got a lot out of this conversation today. Like I mentioned, we shared a lot of personal stories, and hopefully that you could take some of those away and put those to work in your life journey as well. Now that you've made it to the end of another great conversation, are you looking for more? If so, head over to tamacapital.com, where you will find all of our conversations. Use the search feature to find the topic or guest you would love to learn more about. Also, don't forget to make someone else's day by sharing our show. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.